It's day 4 of the Vegas trip, and after a brutal session yesterday, I am now down a total of $900. Today is the last day I'll have time to play poker, so if I want to leave Vegas with a win, I'm just going to have to book a big winning session. We're going back to the Win Poker room today, buying in for $1,500 and hoping to get some revenge. Alright guys, it is very bright. No fancy lunch today, we just have leftover rice from Shokun Ramen and a latte from Afterlife Boba Tea and Boba Room. I don't have much time today. I woke up at 3:30, which I know sounds crazy to you guys, but my sleep schedule has been terrible recently, so it's not even that bad for me. But that means, unfortunately, I cannot play that long of a session at the Win, because I also have to get up early tomorrow and check out. We're just gonna have to run really well, guys. I can probably only do like a 4 or 5 hour session, and then we're just gonna have to head out after that. So, wish me luck. Let's hope we can book a huge win and at least break even on the trip. Very early in the session, I pick up pocket kings in the small blind. There's a $10 straddle. The hijack player limps and action folds to the button, who raises to $75. Quite a big raise even considering the straddle, but I have kings here. Action is on me. I'm definitely putting in a 3-bet, so I make it $225. The hijack gets out of the way and the button calls. So we're going heads up to a flop here of deuce, deuce, ace, rainbow. I'm never thrilled to see an ace on the board, but at the same time, I have the range advantage here, and I think I can bet small here with pretty much any hand. So I make it 175. This gives me the chance to rep strong aces, which I can definitely have on later streets, and my opponent calls pretty quickly. The turn comes, the 5 of hearts. Should be a blank given that this is a 3-bet pot. He's never really going to have 4-3 here, probably not calling with 5s. I decide though that even though this is a good card for me to continue betting on, I actually decide to check here pretty much for pot control. I don't want to get too out of line with kings here and basically just turn it into a bluff. My opponent's always calling if he has like ace queen, ace jack, and I probably am not getting value from things like 9s through jacks. The button checks back. We're going to a river, which is the queen of hearts. And even without an ace, I think I can still get value from a good amount of hands. My opponent definitely could have called the flop with something like queen jack with a backdoor, maybe even king jack, although I blocked that. 9s through jacks might reasonably call, thinking that since I didn't bet the turn, I might be weak. Plus, it's now less likely my opponent has ace queen, and I think he would bet that on the turn once checked to him a good amount of the time. I put out a bet of $200 here, about a quarter pot, to try to get some thin-ish value from, hands like 9s through 10s or maybe queen jack, and my opponent snap calls, so not sure if that's good or not, and he ends up having ace 6 of clubs. Yeah, I guess we're playing deep, so he could definitely be calling with a lot of suited aces, and we're just gonna lose this one. Not too sure about my line in hindsight. In the next hand, I have 9-8 of spades in under the gun +1. The under the gun player just sat down with $1,500, and he opens to $15. I normally don't like flatting an under the gun +1 since it gives other players the opportunity to squeeze, and we're going to be out of position against a lot of people, but I definitely am not folding 9-8 suited in a deep stacked game, and I don't think raising is really an option either, so I do make the call hoping for no squeeze, and luckily there isn't one, but 4 other players call, so we're going 6 ways to a flop. It comes down 7, 9, 10 with 2 diamonds. We've got middle pair and we're open-ended in a multi-way pot, so once the under the gun player continues betting for $25 here, I decide on a raise to $90. We're going to hope to thin the field and potentially win it right here, although looking back, I think the under the gun player is never betting into everyone out of position without at least like top pair, potentially ace 10. The player in the low jack, who looked a lot like Howard Stern, cold calls my raise, and action folds back to the under the gun player, and he decides to 3-bet here to $325. This looks super duper strong. Since he just sat down, I don't know much about this player, and he could absolutely have a very strong hand like a set, but at the same time, he might know that in my position, it would make sense to raise with the semi-bluff, and with the low jack just cold calling, he might see this as an opportunity to raise perhaps for protection if he has like an overpair, or maybe with an extremely strong draw like queen jack of diamonds or something. Either way though, with my stack size not being too big and not having any fold equity here, I don't see a reason to fire back, and I think calling here just isn't the best option. At worst, the low jack has a flush draw, and the under the gun player is probably already ahead, or he has a lot of equity against me, so I decide to just let this one go. The low jack makes a call though. We're going to see what happens. The turn comes the king of hearts. The under the gun player continues with a bet of $300 and the low jack calls again. River, ace of clubs, and now the under the gun player shoves for $860 and Howard Stern decides to fold after showing his hand to someone next to him. I believed I saw the king of diamonds, so he pretty much certainly had a strong flush draw here, maybe pair plus flush draw. With that, I'm already down a good amount for the session. I add on another $600 before the next hand. In this one, there's a $10 straddle, the low jack limps, and the cutoff limps as well. I'm on the button with queen 8 of diamonds, and I decide to raise it up to 55 and get called by both of the limpers. 3 ways to a flop of jack jack 8 with 2 hearts. Once both players check to me, I put out a pretty standard c-bet of 65 here, and both of my opponents call. The turn brings the 7 of diamonds. The flush does not complete, but this does complete 9-10, and in general it should be a better card for my opponent's ranges, so when both of them check to me, I think checking here is the better option, which I do, but I think I could also justify betting for protection against flush draws. Either way, we're going to a river card, which is the 3 of diamonds. The low jack checks once again, and this time the cutoff does not check. He bets $60 here, which is a very tiny bet. He could reasonably have played something like 9s this way, and could have a better 8 as well that he's just trying to get thin value with. It's hard to imagine that he just bets like this without at least an 8, and it's likely his 8 could be better than ours. I think ace 8 is likely, maybe king 8 suited. I also have to worry about the player in the low jack behind, but not anymore because he folds out of turn. So now it's just me and the other player in the pot, and I don't think he's ever betting for value with anything worse than mine. Maybe he just randomly has like 8-9 and just thinks I have nothing. The bet is just so small though, so I just high call. And my opponent ends up having king 8 offsuit. So yeah, we just get a little bit unlucky in this one. And I have yet to win a notable hand. At this point, the table is pretty much all regs, except for maybe one reg player, which is me. I'm just kidding, guys. But anyways, for the next hand, I have king 9 of hearts on the button. I open it to $15 once action folds to me, and the player in the small blind defends. She had just sat down, but so far, she seems like a solid player. The flop comes down 10 for a king with 2 spades. We have top pair, bad kicker. She checks to me and I put out a bet of $20 here, and she snap raises to 45. Kind of a small sizing, and I feel like folding a king is weak here, but I've said that a lot of times in previous hands, saying that folding, you know, this hand or that hand is weak, but at the same time, am I ever going to really have a comfortable run out with my current hand? Not really, but because the raise is so small, I decided to flat and see what develops. The turn comes the 10 of diamonds here, and this is all in all I think a good card. I think my opponent is often going to have like queen jack, maybe 2 spades. Besides that, the only realistic value hands she should have are like king 10, which is very unlikely. So once she bets 115, I called again with the intention of folding the river if I face any more pressure, and the river comes down the 8 of spades. Not a good card as it completes the front door flush, but either way, I was planning on folding to any aggression, but this time my opponent ends up checking, and I have a pretty easy check back. If she's giving up on a bluff, we're just going to try to win it, and I am not getting value from anything worse and not getting anything better to fold. So I just check it back and say I have a king, and she ends up showing queen jack of spades for a monster draw that ended up hitting here. I now very much regret calling on the flop, and I think it's a spot where even though the raise is so small, I can just fold and wait for a better situation and see how my opponent plays before continuing with a marginal hand. I add on another $500 to my stack. We're currently down about $1,100 or so and not running super well. A long time later, I pick up pocket 8s in the cutoff, and there's a $10 straddle. I raise it up to 35 once action folds to me, and the player in the small blind 3 bets to 140. This is the player from yesterday who flopped a set of 6s on me when I had aces, and it turns out he was a Greek pro. So we're going to try to get some revenge, and it turns out we're actually in the exact same seats as the day before. I make the call here with my 8s, hoping to flop a set, especially because we're playing very deep. I do flop a set on 8, ace, 3, rainbow. This is an absolute dream flop for my hand. We got an ace high board, which he's 100% going to bet on. And I have the strongest hand I possibly could have here. He does decide to bet $85 here, and this hand is the worst hand I played this session, in my opinion, because I freaking raise. I know, I can't believe it either, guys,
The reasoning I used at the time was that one, we were playing deep, which is still a bad reason, and two, I thought that this player might see me as just some kid who's trying to play back at him for the hand yesterday. He probably knows that I shouldn't really have a raising range here, so it would seem suspicious, I guess, and he could potentially think I'm just getting out of line with the random bluff as opposed to raising here with a set, which just seems crazy. And it is crazy. This is just a fundamentally bad raise, and I shouldn't try to outplay players who are definitely stronger than I am. Finally, this is the textbook driest flop you could possibly think of, and any turn card would be a good card for him to continue barreling on if I just call here, except for maybe an 8. So I should just let him value own himself, but unfortunately I did not, and unsurprisingly he ends up folding. And I just wanted to show this hand even though it wasn't that eventful because it kind of shows that I'm playing badly and making the wrong decision in a very obvious spot. This was like the easiest flat call in my life, and somehow I managed to mess it up. I'm in the big blind for this next one, and I pick up pocket aces. The under the gun plus 2 player opens to $20, and once action is on me, I 3-bet to 65 and the initial raiser calls. So we're going heads up to a flop of 7-10 jack with 2 hearts. I check it over to my opponent since this is a board that will favor his range and he's going to have a lot of the strongest hands here. The early position player bets $80 and I decide I'm going to call here. The turn is the 6 of diamonds, pretty safe card. It doesn't complete any straight or flush draws he could have. I check to my opponent once again, ready to call any reasonably sized bet, but he decides to check back. So that's a good sign that we're ahead. The river comes the deuce of diamonds. It's blank as it gets, and I am now debating on whether I should check or bet. I think there's merit to both options, since checking will allow my opponent to try to bluff if he has nothing, and it seems like I probably don't have too much given how I played. He probably puts me on something like ace-queen or ace-king, maybe a heart draw, and if he has a jack, he's almost certainly going to value bet it given how the hand played out. But I also think that betting can be very good, since if my opponent does have like a strong jack, which I kind of put him on given how he played, then he could reasonably try to bluff catch if I bet really big. So I actually decided on a pot size bet of $300 to target hands like king jack, ace jack, maybe even worse that might want a hero call. I just don't think that he's going to have very strong hands given how he played, and I think I can get a lot of value by betting as opposed to checking and letting him set his own price basically. So I do decide to go for a $300 size bet, and he pretty quickly makes the call. I say I have aces, pretty certain that we're good, and he shows me the jack of clubs before mucking his hand. So the read was correct, and we get a lot of value in this hand to turn things around. And after this, I am now back up to a stack of around 2,300, which means I'm only down 300. It's obviously not ideal, but given how the session's been going, it feels like I'm winning. It's kind of the opposite feeling of being upstuck. I pick up 7-6 of hearts in the cutoff. There's an early position limp. I make it 20 and I get called by the button, both the blinds, and the limper. So we're going 5 ways to a flop of jack 4-5 with 1 heart. This is really good for us. We've got a backdoor flush draw and an open-ended straight draw. The blinds and early position player check to me. It's good to be in position against everyone except the button. I bet 45 here to try to thin the field. Honestly, I think I can go a bit smaller. 35 or even 30 is fine. And I only get called by the big blind. So we're heads up to a turn card in position, and it comes down the 8 of clubs. We make the nuts on the turn, and we're in a great spot to try to turn the session around. I bet 125 for value out of turn, which was a mistake on my part, but my opponent ends up checking anyways, and then my bet stands, so he ends up just calling my bet, so we do get some value here. And the river comes down, the 8 of diamonds, pairing the board. We are not scared of a boat here, given the way the hand is played out, and I'm ready to put out another bet for value, but my opponent actually doesn't check to me. He leads out for 215. I am loving life right now. I wouldn't say I have the effective nuts, but I pretty much have like the hand that should be best almost all the time. So I put out a raise here to $600. He seems like he's in a really sick spot and thinks for quite a while. After a bit, he eventually folds, saying that he had queen jack. Honestly, I think that's a hand that could definitely just fold quicker. Raising here just seems so strong from my position, and I just don't think I'm going to have too many bluffs here, to be honest.
In hindsight, maybe I can raise much smaller given that information to try to get like a crying call from him. Maybe I could just raise to like 400 something, but honestly, I don't think raising to 600 is too bad. I'm pretty sure most players are just folding any Jack X hands who are raised here anyways. Either way, happy to run good this hand and make a good amount back. I've got one more hand from this session for you guys. I'm in the low jack with ace 4 of clubs, and I open to $35 over a straddle. Both the big blind and the straddle call, so we're going to a flop 3 ways, and it comes down queen 5-10 with 2 clubs. We've got the nut flush draw as well as some backdoor straight opportunities. Once both my opponents check to me, I put out a c-bet of 55 and only get called by the under the gun player. The turn brings the king of spades. We do not improve to a flush, but this does give us a gut shot. My opponent checks to me again, and I think this is a good card for me to barrel on. It's going to improve more of my hands than his. I could have improved to the nuts, I could have kings, king queen, king 10, things like that. And if my opponent had something like king queen or something, he might raise the offsuit combos of those pre-flop since he is out of position. Also, if he had like queen 10 or a set or something, he probably raises on the flop. So I'm pretty sure I can continue putting a lot of pressure, and I now decide to bet 160, sizing up a lot this time to put pressure on a queen. He does decide to call once again though, which is not good. We're looking for some help, and the river brings the queen of diamonds. Very bad card for us. The most likely holding he's calling us with is like queen X, maybe also a club draw, but we block a lot of those. He could definitely have improved to trips here. So once he checks to me, I decide I'm just going to give up here, and I check back. He ends up showing us queen 10 of hearts for a boat. So he did have 2-pair on the flop, and honestly, I think that's fine for him to just flat call there. I think a better hand to raise with on the flop would be like 10s or something, maybe 5s, because then it's possible that I could have ace queen, king queen, things that I could call with. But having a hand like queen 10 blocks many value hands I could have, so it makes sense that he would just flat on the flop and let me continue with bluffs. And that's exactly what happened, so we lose another one to end off the session. I played for 5 hours and 40 minutes, and when all was said and done, I ended up losing 135 for this session. Honestly, kind of a miracle considering how I was playing and how I was running. I don't even know how this happened. But unfortunately, we did not book a win to finish off the trip. However, stick around because I actually had some time to play the next day because my friend wasn't arriving at the airport until 4, so I have a couple more hands to show you guys. Unfortunately, someone at the table wasn't comfortable being recorded. I could have easily changed tables or something, but this was just a casual session before picking up my friend, and I didn't even know if I'd be there long, so I can't really make a full vlog out of that session, which is why I'm including the hands in this one. At the end of the video, I will leave screenshots of my notes for that session, just so that you guys can analyze any hands I didn't include if you're interested. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I lied. There's only one interesting hand from this session to show you guys. I'm in the hijack with pocket 10s. The player in the low jack opens to 20. He's playing pretty short. I decide to 3-bet here to 65, and the player on the button flats. She's the same girl from the last session who was pretty solid. Apparently, she had played through last night, only taking a short break. The small blind calls as well, and so does the initial raiser. So we are going 4 ways to a flop, and it comes down 3-8-9 with 2 clubs. We have an overpair somehow, and this is all I can really ask for in this 4-way pot. 2 players check to me. I bet 130 here, and the player on the button calls. The small blind gets out of the way, and the low jack calls as well. 3 ways to a turn card, which is the 3 of spades. One of the best cards we can ask for here. And the low jack now decides to just shove with his remaining 290. With that sizing, we're never folding against his opponent by himself. I do have to worry about the player on the button. She could realistically have played like jacks or queens this way. I think kings and aces would definitely 4-bet pre-flop, and she could have, 9s, 8s, 9-8, but those are sometimes going to raise on the flop, if not all the time, and with my stack size, I ultimately decide I'm just never folding 10s here with this safe turn card coming out anyways, so I reshove for 465, and immediately the player on the button kind of like shakes her head and goes, I guess I fold, multiple times. She also says she guesses one of us has to have a set and doesn't even move her cards forward yet because she's kind of in disbelief. But her saying that she folds is binding, and the dealer doesn't even take her cards before dealing out the jack of spades. The player on the button says something like damn it, and then shows that she had pocket jacks.
It ends up not mattering though, because once I show that I have 10s, the low jack mucks his cards and leaves, so the player on the button was actually ahead the entire time. Unluckily for her, she ends up making the incorrect fold, though it was understandable considering the situation. We win a nice pot here, but unfortunately the rest of the session went completely terribly, and we actually booked the second biggest loss of $1,080 for this session in only 4 hours, making this the worst session in terms of hourly rate for this trip. Very unfortunate to have a big loss at the very end, especially on the day that I wasn't even supposed to be playing. Here are some screenshots of my notes for this session so that you can see the other hands I wrote down.
Alright guys, losing session, but it was way worse at the beginning, and then we just won a bunch of pretty big hands and basically brought it back to even. Could have been worse, we'll just have to try our best next time. And luckily, even though my former clutch parking spot at the Miracle Mile Shops is no longer free, it's not that long of a walk from where I'm staying to Nacho Daddy. So we're gonna finish off with one of these staple tropes of the Dogebag Poker Vlog. Alright guys, that's gonna be it for the poker trip. I'm spending 3 more days in Vegas, but I will not have time to play poker. So that's my last session. I hope you guys enjoyed the hands as always, and let's get to the results real quick.
For this trip, I played just over 30 hours, and unfortunately, I lost 2,100, only winning 1 session on my birthday and then losing for the rest of the trip. I didn't run super well, but I can't say I played that well either, so it is what it is. We'll get them next time. Anyways, thank you guys for watching as always and for joining me on this Vegas trip. I will see you guys back in California for the next vlog. Peace.